Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Grama, the Managing Director of Maniv Mobility. Maniv is a venture fund based here in Tel Aviv, investing in early stage mobility companies around the world. And we're proud to be backed by some of the world's large automakers and to invest in amazing companies in Israel and elsewhere. I'm joined today by someone I know well and who you will get to know. His name is Robbie Diamond, and he is the founder of an organization based in Washington, D.C., called SAFE. Used to be an acronym for Securing America's Future Energy, and it's all about energy security, which is, of course, intricately linked to transportation and to transportation technology. And Robbie, would you say that I've been involved in the organization for some time?
Yeah, I think it's about 18, 19 years now when we first sketched out what SAFE could look like at a Starbucks on Route 9 in New Jersey. But we've grown since then. We now have the Electrification Coalition and the Commission on the Future Mobility. So we're a big family in a big tent.
And what a lot of people probably don't know is that Elon Musk was Saturday Night Live's second choice. You were actually first supposed to host, isn't that right?
I'm sure I would have been funnier.
But Robbie, why don't you start off? Just give us a little bit of color on SAFE's mission.
Yeah, I mean, our mission is to, well, as you heard, when we started, it was really to end oil dependence for economic and national security. Back in 2004, when Mike and I were talking to each other, we were looking at a world with China and India and growing oil supply, American oil supply going down, every major recession being preceded by an oil price spike, and prices at that time going up, 2 wars and a global war on terror. And we just said, why is our transportation sector, why is oil the lifeblood of a global mobile economy? We need to do something about this and solve this problem. And we really look to diversify transportation fuels in the vehicle, which is why electrification is a big part of our agenda and our subsequent electrification coalition. But really, we've shifted in the last 2 years to not just think about oil and its chokehold on the United States, but if electrification is the solution, the entire supply chain, well, not just electrification, but the industrial base of the United States is really dependent on the car industry. Same with the industrial base in the entire Western world. Just look at France, Korea, Germany, Japan. And so if the next set of innovations in transportation or mobility is autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, we see semiconductors as so important, 5G networks. And China has really taken this tremendous lead and has all these supply lock on the supply chain. So it would be crazy to go from dependence on oil to dependence on the supply chain from China. So our mission is really focused on how do we compete to make sure that we have resilient and secure supply chains as we drive towards this new mobility future.
Now, Robbie, I'm sure that you, like me, have had some moments over the last few months of deja vu, because we were together in Washington 12 years ago when the Obama administration came in the middle of a crisis and spent a lot of money, and a lot of it was in areas that we cared about. And now his vice president is in the early months of his administration, 12 years later, also spending a lot of money, including a lot of money on things that we care about. So why don't you talk a little bit about the Biden administration and how it relates to our issue, their appointments, transportation and energy, and of course the big infrastructure package that they have proposed.
Okay, I'll give a couple answers. You might have to follow up and ask me some of those because I could just talk the whole rest of the time on a monologue. I would say that, things are substantially different, though. So first of all, when Obama did this, it was really focused on getting out of the recession that we had related to the housing crisis. And they just wanted to throw money at a problem. And this was an area that they cared about. These were quote unquote shovel ready projects, whether they were or weren't. This is really focused on actually making this transition. So the money they're spending is not just, hey, this will create a job. This is focused on actually achieving this goal. The other thing is, I think that the Obama administration was less focused on workers It is true when people listen to Joe Biden and he says, I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and the importance of a job, and when his father lost his job, these things are very deep to him. So he's much more blue collar and thus labor and union than Obama was, who might have been more environmentally focused. So those two things are tension in this administration. So they're going much bigger, much more focused, but now there's this new element, which is like where it's built, what kind of jobs they are. And the other thing I would just say for an audience that's maybe not watching this all the time, what's going on in the United States, you really have this idea of environmental justice, if you've heard those words. That is really come out of, I'd say less than a year, and has colored like every decision that's being made, or at least I think it's more than the talking about it. It is something that you should show, and if you can show that what you're doing is helpful for this environmental justice, equity, helping people, it is infused in the administration. So those are just three things that I think are different than you saw Obama. It's not just a pot of money. It's also, by the way, much more money than President Obama ever thought of spending. So these things are maybe subtle to some people, but really important in the political context. We can go and talk about Republicans in a moment, but many people think, oh, he put out this plan, but if you're not in the American system, you don't always realize it's just a plan. Even the Democrats in Congress aren't going to do his plan. These were their ideas. So it is far away from spending that amount of money on all these things. And it's not even sure that they'll spend it in the way that Biden put out in his plan.
And I should probably emphasize for our viewers that one of the things that has made SAFE so effective over the years is the fact that it recognizes that there are certain solutions that actually kind of defy the political perceptions. For example, how do you get Republicans to support incentives on electric cars when they think that that is just government choosing winners to impact climate? Which is not an issue that they care about. Well, you demonstrate that big CEOs, that many of whom tend to lean Republican, find that their businesses depend on stable oil prices, and the stable oil prices don't happen in a world in which there's a monopoly status of oil and there's no alternatives for any part of transportation. You also demonstrate that there are, security risks to that oil dependence. Then you bring in 4-star generals to make that case. And that's something that SAFE has done, put together an Energy Security Leadership Council made up of business leaders and military leaders to make this case. And I recall way back about 15 years ago when we had a great success in getting the first, I believe the first in the world, electric vehicle incentives, a $7,500 tax credit for EVs. Talk about EVs in 2021. It's a whole different world now, yet those incentives are still in place, and there isn't a whole lot of new policy around EVs. What do you think the policy should be going forward, and what are the dynamics, which are obviously very different than when we first started talking about this way back then?
Right. In many ways, I do believe that it is a much more fertile environment to act on these types of issues, even from back then when the $7,500. So once the $7,500 tax credit gets instituted, passed, and President Obama gets into an electric vehicle, a Chevy Volt at the time, and suddenly becomes a climate vehicle that no Republican can support. There are still a few, but it's sort of this Tesla, and then becomes sort of a Tesla tax credit. And so it's been really difficult, and especially as oil production in the United States has gone up, and so it's been seen as a less secure issue, although I dispute that there's any real change. It really became a political, ideological, just like everything infusing all of our politics around the world these days. And I think your Israeli listeners would appreciate that infusion of ideology and politics. And so, right now, this China, I don't think people who are here quite appreciate it. It is the only bipartisan issue in the United States of America. And they're different. It's not like everyone sees them.
We still like to think that
They're
the U.S.
competitors or their enemies. What?
We
Sorry.
still like to think the U.S.-Israel relationship is also bipartisan, but China is another.
I have so much I could say about that, Mike. I'm not going to say anything. Yes, but it is very like people are focused on these supply chains, right? So this was started, I think, President Trump and labor really infused this. Like, look, we don't do anything in America, and then you have all these tariffs, and then COVID came, and COVID was this final wake up call, and it was really a tsunami of this idea in Washington, how our supply chains don't exist. We can't get PPE, we can't get pharmaceuticals that then built on previously on the 5G and the Huawei. So right now, we have briefed over 200 offices and Democrat, Republican, and they all want to know about this question about EVs, batteries for battery storage, supply chains. Now, that being said, although it is incredibly it's incredibly rich in there, and the desire to do something. You still have a lot of ideology you have to get beyond, right? So, Democrats need to appreciate, you have to actually extract minerals. You actually have to process those. We do none of that in the United States. Republicans need to understand if the market isn't going to be here because you're not going to incentivize it, that stuff's not going to happen here, and then it might be too late. So there is a moment, I think, of people feeling around, and the old politics is still part of it. But at the same time, it is a new hearing, a new day to talk about new mobility, principally EVs, where I think a lot of the focus and the supply chains for EVs. And then, moving on to AVs and other types of sharing and everything else we hear about connected, autonomous, shared, and electric.
So let's talk about AVs, because a few years ago, it seemed as if there might be federal legislation around regulating AVs, which ended up not happening. So we still have basically AVs being regulated at the state level, and there's a lot of differences in California, Arizona, Florida, and other places. What are the prospects? First of all, is there interest in AV regulation at the federal level these days? And what does the new transportation secretary think about that? And what do you think the prospects are that something will happen?
So it's a very hot topic right now, actually, because there's a bill in the United States called the Endless Frontiers Act, which is a bipartisan bill between the majority leader of the United States Senate, Senator Schumer, and Senator Todd Young, a Republican from Indiana. And it's a massive bill to allow the United States to compete with China. There's several $100 billion that the National Science Foundation will put out to 10 industries that matter. Now, as part of that, they're having these what are called markups, and in the Senate, and one of the provisions happens to be to allow companies to have what are called exemptions to build vehicles that don't look like our current vehicles, which is actually at a crucial moment, right? If you're Cruise and you've got these vehicles, you're like, should I, retool a GM factory to build these things? Or you're Neuro, delivering food. All these things are very important. And they stripped out liability protection issues. They stripped everything out. It's just to allow these what's called exemptions, because the FMVSS, which is how we regulate safety of vehicles, is so antiquated, but it's so long a process to fix it over the last 60 years or so we've been working on this thing. So but I hate to say that, and it's bipartisan amendment. You've got Senator Thune and Senator Peters, Michigan, and North Dakota. And yet the Teamsters, the trial lawyers, they are, actually the Teamsters went from just being opposed to trucks to being opposed to trucks and cars. So, it's really problematic. I'd say this is their best chance in the last 5 years. And, I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. And it's kind of disappointing, right? Because you read these announcements going on in China and other places that they allow. Now, at the same time, in the States, you do have Cruise in San Francisco. You do have, Ford and Argo AI in Miami. So they're doing things. But we're at a point to ask ourselves, how are we going to scale? And we can't answer that question, I think, in the United States. Now, nowhere else can either. But in China, one guy can snap his fingers and they can answer that question. And here it can just go on forever. I'm sadly to say, I don't think there's much activity right now in the Department of Transportation. I think that there just seems to be an ideological thing on the left at the moment. So I don't want to, look, it's a big department. They've got many appointees and stuff. So I don't know where it will go. But they're very focused on this EVs, and I think that's sort of left AVs to the side. And I think that's a real disappointment because to me, and I think to you, AVs are part of the solution, right? If you really want to have a non-dystopian world where you can provide point-to-point mobility at an incredibly cheap price, you would need an EV and an AV together. And so here they are talking about equity, helping people live in these communities that can't get to where they want to go. Buses don't really do what they want to do, right? The only people who want to take a big bus are the people who can afford it because they're the 1% say, oh, we need all those buses. But this is potentially the new public transit that's much cheaper, cleaner, safer. And I think that they don't see it like that. They see it as some big corporate, giveaway. Many people, so the safety community has all their problems. You'd think they'd be for something safer. The environmentalists sort of see dystopian cars driving everywhere. And so, like I say, I don't know where it's going to go. Right now, it's a very hot topic. By next week, we'll know if it goes anywhere. I know not to time this, so it's May 10th for people who might. When did he say that? And hopefully we'll see some action. But right now, I think it's going to continue to be like deploy as much as you can, show why this is good. And ultimately, as many things in America happen, like it will just happen because, consumers see it and want it.
Yeah, I was going to say in our last couple minutes, when you and I first started talking about EVs so long ago, we wouldn't imagine that there'd be a company at a valuation like Tesla's that was all about electric cars. And, it's curious to think about what might be in the coming years. Will there be a breakthrough company on AVs that suddenly cuts through all of the political noise and through all of the market chatter and just goes out and delivers a product that people want?
Maybe we didn't think there'd be a company at Tesla's valuation, but we knew that he would be on SNL. You and I predicted that 18 years ago.
And we also predicted that EVs would be at a much higher rate of penetration than it turns out they are, even with Tesla. So we're not always right about everything, but people can now save this tape and see how the predictions turn out. Speaking of which, in our closing minute or so, what's one thing that nobody believed that you actually think we're going to see in the next few years in the energy and transportation and world?
What do I think we'll see that people
that would surprise people? Yeah,
that would surprise people. Sadly, I'm not sure much will surprise people. I think we're going to lumber along for a while. I mean, I do think the auto sector is much more poised to reform itself, and they might not all survive. So maybe that's the biggest surprise. Like they will come out with EVs. Now, I don't think it will take 2 years. I think it's a bit longer runway, not because they necessarily want it, but these are massive capitalized companies that are, just having to change. And also the amount of minerals we're going to need, the amount of supply chain we're going to need is just so tremendous. I think people don't really have any fine appreciation for what needs to happen. But they as companies are no longer fighting it. They as companies. And I think that will be the greatest change as they begin to, turn over their factories. I think build supply chains around the world. So it's not just like importing stuff from the processed goods from China or Korea. So I think, some of these, maybe it's not in the exact same factory, but, engine facilities will become, more chemical plants. Yeah. I mean, that's what batteries are. So I think we'll begin to see a shifting of the types of workers that there are, and whole industries will change in the world. Very interesting. Where can people find out more about SAFE? People can go to secureenergy.org. That's 2 E's, SECUREENERGY.org. You can read about our Commanding Heights project, our Commission on the Future of Mobility, our Grid Security project, and link to our sister organization, the Electrification Coalition. Robbie, we can't wait to get you back in Israel in person. Your daughter's here, which we're excited about.
And it was really fun chatting. And we'll hope they'll let us do this again.
But who will feed the fish when I come?
That's you got to figure out.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. And go to secureenergy.org and see how Robbie's predictions come out over the next several years.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thanks, everyone.